Carmen, Georges Bizet. A lot of you listening, if you're tuning into an opera broadcast on public radio, probably you have a good degree of familiarity with Bizet's Carmen. Of all the operas I can think of, Carmen might be the opera that would appear on both a list of the 10 most popular operas in opera history and the 10 greatest operas. I just consider it to be a profound masterpiece. But its very popularity, I think, works against it sometimes. I think Carmen suffers from its familiarity. There is so much of the music that is, what I would call ear candy, and that has crossed over into popular culture, that I think when we approach Carmen, maybe we just put our ears and our brains on cruise control. Do you know what I'm saying? There's so many of these tunes that are just ubiquitously known in Western culture. You know what they are. You know this tune, don't you? Of course you do. It's the good old habanera, the tune that that Bizet thought was a folk tune and discovered to his chagrin was actually a published composition that he unintentionally stole from a composer named Sebastian Irradier, a song called El Arregleto. He had to credit the composer in the first published score, Oh Well. And then other tunes, for instance, this one that we won't spend much time discussing because it's really a very minor composition and a very unimportant part of this opera. However, it is the tune that, I'll tell you about the Toreador song. I think if you went into the worst neighborhoods in downtown Norfolk, in the middle of the night, where hardened criminals hang out, the horrible people, the drug dealers, and you started whistling the following tune, they would all start whistling with you because they all know it too. Yeah, so the habanera gives us the sultry, sexy Carmen that we like, and the Toreador song gives us the catchy, toe-tapping Carmen that we like. And then, of course, there's also the exotic gypsy with the flaming, the black hair that's tossed in the breeze, and the gaily colored skirts that twirl as she dances, and the clicking castanets. You know that Carmen, too. Olé! Yeah, we all like that Carmen. And you can, but you shouldn't, but you can just sit back and treat Carmen as a concert, as a purely musical event. Close your eyes and let the familiar tunes wash over you and set your toes a-tapping. And if that's how you approach Carmen, it's like getting a French kiss through a screen door, my friends. You're missing out on a great deal. And your kindly Uncle Glenn is here to help you figure out what is actually great about this opera, because, let me be frank, the Toreador song does not make Carmen a great opera. The Toreador song is a highly mediocre little bit of march tune that is duplicated in probably 10,000 operas. It's fine, it's okay, but it's not what we would consider great art. Great art in opera happens when you have a marriage of drama and penetrating insight into human psychology and compelling music that wind up giving you insight into the human condition, that tell you the truth about what it is to be a human being. And this is what Carmen delivers in spades. Now, here's a question for you. You know how the opera ends. Don José, the spurned lover, corners Carmen outside the bull ring in downtown Seville, and they have their final set to, and he's basically got his knife out. She has dumped him long ago and moved on to the toreador Escamillo, and tells him, I no longer love you. And he says, yes, you do. You know you love me. We can start again. You tell me you love me. And he's got a knife at her throat. Tell me you love me. Now, ladies, I have a question for you who are listening today. If an old boyfriend of yours backs you up against a brick wall with a knife at your throat and says, do you love me? I really think that 99.5 out of 100 of you are going to say, absolutely, sweetheart, it was always you, you know. And if he says, will you run away and start a new life with me? And he's got that knife poised to go into your body, I think you're going to say, absolutely, wait right here, I'm just going to go get my purse, and then you try to get away. Or maybe you slip him a Mickey at dinner that night, but you're not going to defy him. So we have to ask ourselves, how come in this very same situation, Carmen says, no, I don't love you. Do what you're going to do, but I'm not going to say I love you, because guess what? I don't. This is amazing behavior. What the heck? Why does she do that? She's a little like Don Giovanni when the statue of the Commendatore comes to demand that he repent. Don Giovanni says, I don't repent. Why should I say I repent when I don't? These are characters that mystify us, that are thought-provoking. They don't behave in ways that we would behave, most of us. So I get to thinking about Carmen. She shows no fear in that final duet with the deranged Don José. And that's kind of a red flag in human behavior, isn't it? So I did a little research into a particular area. I'm not an expert on this, but I read a whole lot of internet articles from Psychology Today and other kind of authoritative publications that tell us about the pathology that we call the sociopath. Because that is one of the key traits and behaviors of the sociopath. That's someone who is unable to experience fear. And this is what Carmen displays throughout the time that we observe her. So I looked at the list of the other aspects of sociopathology. What is a sociopath, and how true to life, how good an example of a sociopath is Carmen? And I discovered to my amazement that she is a textbook example of the sociopath. The sociopath, well, we already have one of these. We know that she displays no fear when her life is threatened by a spurned lover. What else do we have? Well, she repeatedly, a sociopath will repeatedly perform acts which would qualify for arrest, whether or not they're caught or imprisoned. The first time that we encounter Carmen in Act 1, shortly after the habanera, when she and the other girls of the plaza go back in to begin their afternoon shift at the Seville cigar factory, a fight breaks out. The woman working next to Carmen says something insulting, and without thinking, Carmen gets out a knife and slashes her across the face. Risky behavior that would qualify for an arrest. Then the interesting thing that happens immediately after is the girls go and get the soldiers who are policing downtown Seville to keep the peace, and Carmen is dragged out for questioning preparatory to her arrest. And one of the officers says, tell me what happened in there. Why did you slash that girl across the face? And Listen carefully to Carmen's response.
Fais-nous grâce de tes chansons, et puisque l'on t'a dit de répondre, réponds. Mon secret, je le garde, et le je garde bien.
So, another telltale red flag behavior of the sociopath is the lack of remorse or shame, as indicated by being indifferent. So Carmen is dragged out for questioning. When she is asked why she attacked this girl, rather than saying, "Well, it was her fault. I couldn't help it. I'm so sorry," breaking down in tears. I don't know what came over me. Instead, what do we get? Tra la 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 la. Total insolence, total indifference. Textbook sociopath. Now, this continues. Here's what you all need to do before you come see Virginia Opera's Carmen. You need to read the short novel by Prosper Mérimée that came out in the 1830s, which was the basis for this opera. If you just go to Google and type in Carmen novel, you'll get an English translation that pops up in a PDF file that you can read for free. And it's very entertaining. It's very well written. It's a page turner. And it will also give you a lot of backstory about this character. Now, in the scene in the novel that corresponds to the Seguidilla, Carmen is placed under arrest for that fight in the cigar factory. And she's being guarded by a young soldier, who is, of course, our protagonist, our lead tenor character, Don José. And Carmen wants to escape. She does not want to go to jail. So in the opera, she sings the famous Seguidilla, in which she starts twisting her hips in a very seductive way and singing in a way that can't help but catch Don José's attention. But in the novel, she starts speaking to him in his own Basque dialect. And later, Don José tells the narrator who's interviewing him that these gypsy women, because they have no homeland, the gypsies are very adept at languages. They can speak a little Portuguese, a little Italian, a little German, a little English, a little Moorish. They can make themselves understood by anybody. And when Don José, in the novel, hears his homeland dialect being spoken by this beautiful woman, something snaps in him. He says, "I felt like a drunken man. I wanted to do foolish things. I wanted to say foolish things." And he lets her go. Now, what's interesting to me is the way that Georges Bizet brilliantly transfers this concept of linguistic ability, of being able to mimic and imitate any language, into musical terms. Because the interesting thing about Carmen's music is that she is a chameleon. She never sings twice in the same musical style. What she does is adopt the musical style of whoever she's with, because that way she can manipulate them and achieve whatever her agenda is. Because you see, to the sociopath, other people are just objects. Now, as we were setting up to record this broadcast this morning, Dwight Davis, my engineer, was having trouble with the new equipment in the WHRO studio. He had to push this button and that button. He couldn't get the object, that new recording system, to do what he wanted it to do, but he finally pushed the right buttons and the tape began rolling. Well, to the sociopath, that's what human interactions are. Other people are just objects. You want them to do what you want them to do, and so you have to find a way to push their buttons. Now, Carmen, like all sociopaths, is very good at reading people. And she reads Don José like a past master, like a great psychologist. Don José wears his heart on his sleeve. He is very passionate. He is very earnest at all times. And there is a moment at the end of this great aria, the Seguidilla, in which Carmen says, you know, I don't need a general or a corporal. I could be happy with just a plain soldier boy like you. And she looks into Don José's eyes and says, if you would love me, I will love you, with great fake sincerity, and she uses the kind of melody that Don José typically sings. Sounds like this. Prior to that moment right there, when she was singing the folk-like Seguidilla, Don José was very disdainful. Stop singing, prisoner. Be quiet over there. But when he heard his own musical style, now he's transfixed, and he looks back at her and says, Carmen, if you'll promise to love me, I will love you. I'll do anything for you. And he sings back that same melody.
Carmen, je suis comme un homme ivre, si je cède, si je me livre, ta promesse, tu la tiendras, oh, si je t'aimais, Carmen, oh, tu
And by the way, he told her, Carmen, I am like a drunken man, which is a direct quote out of Prosper Mérimée's novel. Now, never again throughout this opera does Carmen sing with that kind of heartfelt, passionate sincerity. Carmen has heard that old adage that if you can fake sincerity, you've got it made. In Act 2, there's another example of her musical ability to ape others' styles of other people's language, in this case, musical language. There is, of course, this band of gypsy thieves that is terrorizing Seville. The street gangs, like any big city will have, and Seville was a tourist city even in those days, a cosmopolitan metropolis where you would have visitors from all over Europe. And this band of basically a street gang of juvenile delinquents, these gypsy boys, would get pretty girls to lure the tourists into a dark alleyway and hold them up or slit their throats and take their valuables. And there is a marvelous quintet in Act 2 in which two of these young tough boys are trying to recruit Carmen and two of her gypsy girlfriends, Frasquita and Mercedes, to get them to help them. They're going to need some recruits because there's a big score coming into town. And the funny thing about juvenile delinquents, about street gangs, even today when you watch them interact with the police, they don't take anything very seriously. They're kind of sassy very often, aren't they? Everything's a joke to people like this. So appropriately, in the tone of this wonderful quintet in Act 2, the tone is bantering and joking. The boys will say to the girls, "Oh, could we have the honor of you accompanying us on this quest?" Words to that effect. And the ladies say, "Oh, we would be so charmed." And it's all very light, very opera comique, and Carmen joins right in because, like all sociopaths, she wants to blend in with whoever she's with at the moment.
Quand il s'agit de tromperie et d'éclairie, de bonnerie, il est toujours bon sur ma voie d'avoir les femmes avec soi. Et sans elles, les tours de belle, on ne fait jamais rien de bien. Sans jamais rien de bien. Et de coupable, c'est la vie, si fait, je suis de cette vie. Et de coupable, c'est la vie, si fait, je suis de cette vie. Si fait, moi, je suis de cette vie. Il est toujours bon sur ma voie d'avoir les femmes avec soi. Et sans elles, les tours de belle, on ne fait jamais rien de bien. Il est toujours pour ce qu'on va les femmes avec soi.
That is wonderful stuff. And again, it's a style of music in which Carmen will not express herself other than that one moment. Now, let's leap ahead to Act 4. At this point, Carmen has long since dumped Don José, who became obsessed with her, who became neurotically jealous and possessive, and she is now the woman, the girlfriend and perhaps the fiancée of the toreador Escamillo. And before he goes into a fight in the championship bullfight with all of Seville there to watch him, Carmen parades down to the entrance of the bull ring with him on his arm, and they have a short duet. Now, is this duet passionate and earnest? No, I don't think so. You know, I teach some opera appreciation classes around the Commonwealth of Virginia. I played what you're about to hear, the Carmen Escamillo duet from Act 4, for one of my classes, and I asked for volunteers to describe the nature of that duet. And I loved one woman's answer. She said, it's kind of syrupy. And it really is. Suddenly, Carmen has become the nice domestic little wifey who's going to wait patiently for her husband and, I guess, cook meatloaf and cupcakes after the bullfight that day. And there's a certain smug confidence to Escamillo's proclamations of love to her, which she answers in the very same tone, in the most syrupy duet in opera. Again, adopting the tone of Escamillo because it's what he wants from her. Sociopaths know what you want from them, and they'll give it to you for the purpose of manipulating you. So let's see where we are on our checklist of the behaviors of the sociopath. Performing acts that would qualify for arrest, check. Impulsiveness, failure to plan ahead. Well, again, that knife fight in the tobacco factory certainly qualifies. Repeated deceit, lying for personal gain. Well, telling Don José that she will love him if he will let her go. And as a matter of fact, Don José in the novel by Mérimée says that really every word that ever came out of her mouth was a lie. Now, aggression and irritability. Let's talk about that. Is Carmen capable of love? Well, she's capable of sex. She's very free with sex, and of course, sexual promiscuity is another hallmark of that is very typical of the sociopath. But for Carmen, sex has nothing to do with love. Sex is commerce. It is simply a way of manipulating half the population of the world, the male half. She does. Don José goes to prison because he let her go, as you probably know. And in Act 2, when he's released from prison a few months later, he comes looking for her because, after all, she promised to love him. Now, there is honor among thieves. Carmen knows that she owes a debt to him. He did go to jail for her. So she is willing to go to bed with him a few times, to be his lover for a short while. That is the use of sex that she is capable of, sex as a currency to pay debts. But we soon see that This is a very shallow affect for her. It's not something she's really. Love is something that's just not something that she can experience in an authentic way. As that's the other thing about the sociopath. Emotional affects such as empathy, shame, remorse, fear, love, humor. These are all things which you and I can feel, but they cannot. But they're always observing the well-adjusted people of the world. They know how to imitate those affects, and they're very good at it. So when Don José comes to her in the tavern in Act 2, ready to begin his intimate relationship with her, she's going to play ball. She's going to act nicely to him. So she gets out her castanets. The crowd has long left since Escamillo finished his celebration prior to this. They have the place to themselves, and she's going to do a very sexy castanet dance for him. I guess it's the 1870s version of a lap dance. And so she's as charming as she can be. Everything's going so nicely when that little dance is interrupted by the distant sound of trumpets, military trumpets, calling Don José back to the barracks. And he is chagrined, he's frustrated. He tells her, baby, sorry, can I get a rain check? I have to go back or I'll be AWOL. I don't want to go to prison again. Now, what would a woman who was really in love, what would she say at a point like this? Oh, she might say something like, golly, sweetheart, are you sure you have to go back? They won't care if you're a little bit late, will they? I really want you to stay. Something like that. Carmen's reaction is so revealing. Because, friends, the one emotional affect that is authentically experienced by the sociopath is rage. And when Carmen understands that Don José's going to leave in the middle of her dance, she turns on a dime and is immediately enraged. Listen to her rant at him, making fun of the trumpets. Ta-da-ta-ta, oh, fine, go back. Oh, yes, it's the trumpets. Go back, little boy, go back to your barracks. And I love it, she calls him a canary, canari, because the dragoons in this military outfit wore yellow outfits.
Ta-ra-ta-ta, c'est le clairon qui sonne. Ta-ra-ta-ta, il part, il est parti. Va-t'en-donc, canari, tiens, prends ton chapeau, ensemble, il est mort. Il faut tout, garçon, retourne à ta case.
Again, this is a clinical description 100% accurate of how sociopaths interact with people. And, of course, Don José is heartbroken at her response at this tirade, and he responds with what I believe is the most beautiful love song ever written. He withdraws from his coat pocket the by now bedraggled and dried up flower that she tossed to him following the habanera in Act 1. Although he pretended to scorn it at the time, he actually kept it with him, and he describes to her in the most meltingly, heavenly, beautiful aria that I have ever heard, how that flower kept him going during his time in prison. We have to hear a little bit of this because I really think it's the most beautiful love song ever written.
Gardez toujours sa douce. temmo dire, a te deteste a me dire.
And, of course, that aria will come to a glorious conclusion with the simple words, Carmen, je t'aime. Carmen, I love you. Now, the next track you'll hear is 8 seconds in length. It consists of Carmen's response to this aria. Well, ladies, if some man sang to you like that, and I hope that at some point in your life some man has sung to you like that, what would be your response? Wouldn't you kind of melt into his arms if you were attracted to him? Wouldn't you say, oh, honey, I mean, that's pretty ardent lovemaking there. Carmen says this. Non, tu ne m'aimes pas. No, you don't love me. Seriously? Seriously, Carmen? That's your response? To say in a totally flat tone of voice with no affect whatsoever, no, you don't love me. What is this about? Well, I'll tell you what she was thinking during José's aria. Her cold, calculating lizard brain was observing him and was thinking, wow, he's really into me. I can get him to do anything I want. Huh. Gosh, the gypsy boys, they need some recruits. We could use a horse, to help us pull off this next robbery. He's got a horse. I bet I can get, if he's singing like this, I can get him to desert the army. He'll come with us. He can help us. He'll do anything I tell him to do. So he finishes his ardent proclamation of love, and she says, no, you don't love me. And she goes on to say, like many teenage boys have said to their girlfriends in the back seat of their father's Plymouth, if you loved me, you would fill in the blank. In this case, run away from the army and join our band of gypsy thieves. The total sociopath. Interestingly, the one time that Carmen sings, when there's no one listening to her and there's no one around to manipulate, is in the card aria, the card scene, in which she takes a deck of cards and by herself, already feeling on edge because of José's obsessive behavior there in Act 3, she tells her fortune with the cards, and the death card keeps turning up. And when you come to the Harrison Opera House and we come to the card scene, I want you to notice how empty that aria is, how fatalistic. There is no affect whatsoever. There's kind of a black hole where her heart ought to be. Carmen, the sociopath. Now, in the few minutes we have remaining this afternoon, I'd like to put another character on the psychiatrist's couch, and that would be Don José. Don José is a more complicated and interesting character than I think a lot of audiences assume that he is, because, he behaves like the typical tenor hero. What do you expect from a tenor? You expect a glorious love song with ringing high notes and poetic phrases, just like that flower song. You expect him to be constantly talking about how he loves you, his heart is overflowing with love, blah, blah, blah. You expect him to seem like a nice guy. And Don José on the surface kind of rings all of those bells. He is the one man present during the singing of the habanera who's not particularly impressed by Carmen, who doesn't pay her any mind. And why is that? Because he's got a girlfriend. He's got a girl who is sweet and pure and kind, the girl next door from his own neighborhood in the Basque country. That is the lovely young Micaela. Micaela, she always reminds me of Melanie from Gone with the Wind. Sweeter than sweet, purer than pure. She is not just the girl that you would bring home to Mother. She's the girl that Mother is pushing at you on a silver platter. We learn when Micaela comes to visit José that she goes to church with Mom, and that Mom has sent her to visit her baby boy with a particular errand. She wants Mom wants Michaela to deliver a motherly kiss to Don José. So we see that Michaela is kind of the proxy for José's mother. And they sing a 12-minute duet. It is a gorgeous piece of music. I love it. And it's a soprano singing a duet with a tenor, but they're singing about love, but not for each other. It's a 12-minute duet about Mom. Boy, do we love Mom. Here's the thing. I don't think José does love his mother. I don't think he loves Michaela, even though he proclaims tenderly in an aside to the audience that he's going to marry her instead of that witch Carmen. I don't think he loves Carmen. I don't think Don José loves women, even though every third word out of his mouth is amour. Oh, je t'adore, je t'aime. He seems like a big bucket of love, and I don't think he loves any women. I think that Don José is a textbook example of misogyny. He is one of those men who hates women. What, I'm crazy, right? I'm thinking too hard. Just sit back and enjoy the opera, Glenn. Nope, I'm going to prove it to you. A funny thing happens during that duet, the conclusion of which we just heard. Michaela says, your mother wants to forgive you. That you can, if you're not watching the super titles or following the libretto, you can easily miss that little line. Huh? Mother needs to forgive him? What's that about? Well, if you know the backstory of Don José, you know that back as a young man, back in his hometown in the Basque provinces, during a game of pelota, one of the national sports of that region, a fight broke out, like happens in National Hockey League games and so forth. And instead of just getting a penalty, Don José killed a man. He's got blood on his hands. In fact, that's what he's doing in Seville. That's why he joined the army. He's on the lam. He's hiding out from the authorities back home because he is a killer. So again, I've looked up several articles on the behaviors of men who hate women, misogynists. They are usually overly rugged or thuggish. They are involved often in violent sports. Well, already his backstory has given us that. They are usually members of fraternities, gangs, or organizations where men are the only members or where men have full domination and control. In Acts 1 and 2, Don José is in the military. In Acts 3, he becomes a member of that street gang of thieves. They're usually very well spoken. Did you listen to the flower song? Pretty articulate, I would say. Unexpectedly, they are usually quite intrigued by women whom they perceive to be strong, outspoken, and self-sufficient. That's Carmen, isn't it? Now, speaking of Carmen and Don José and his mother, I've got a question for you. After a 12-minute duet in which he proclaims his devotion to Mom, but in which we hear the disturbing fact that Mom wants to forgive him, what happens after that? How come, if he loves his mom so much, he abandons Michaela, who is mom-tested and mom-approved, and becomes completely obsessed with Carmen? He goes running to the woman who is the polar opposite of his mother, the anti-mom, everything that mom isn't. Doesn't that seem kind of odd to you if he's really such a mama's boy? Well, one of the traits of a misogynist is that they have a poor relationship with their mother. I can't help but think, what did José's mother do to him? Because, in Act 3, when Michaela once again makes her way to be the mom's messenger, finding José in the thieves' hideout in the mountains, she says, "You must come home. Your mother is on her deathbed, and she wants to forgive you." Once again, the 2 times we hear about Mom, she's all about forgiving him. Well, this time, I suppose, it's because he's now a military deserter. All right, I'll admit I'm speculating here, but I think I might be onto something. I think that from earliest childhood, Don José was a total disappointment to his mother, always letting her down, never living up to her hopes and expectations. Maybe she wanted him to be a priest, and instead he was a thuggish athlete who killed a man on the playing field. Maybe this is their syndrome, that he's always disappointing her and she's always needing to forgive him. Is it any wonder, under those circumstances, he might run to a gypsy girl like Carmen, who will not have high expectations of him? I just think we might be on to something there. There is a Jekyll and Hyde aspect to the misogynist. They are capable of being very sweet and charming to women. But eventually, that's Dr. Jekyll. Eventually, the monster called Mr. Hyde will come out, and they will be abusive. They are also pathologically jealous and possessive of women, always wanting to know who they're spending time with. Well, in Act 3, this is what happens. It's clear that Carmen, by the time we're in Act 3, months have passed with José having long since deserted the army, that she is tired of him. He's not much of a lover. He is a little bit odd. He's not like the other gypsy boys, and he is certainly always demanding who she's been with and aware of her attraction to Escamillo. And when Michaela comes to demand that he go home with her to say goodbye to his ailing mother, the monster, Mr. Hyde, comes out. Carmen says, "Yes, you should just go away with this girl. You're not one of us anymore. You should just leave us." And the obsessive, possessive Don José breaks out of his shell of sweetness and politeness and lets us see the monster as he tells her he will never leave her.
Na, na, na.
Meet the monster. That's not a man who is expressing love. He's expressing domination and possessiveness. And what's interesting to me in that scene as well is that when Michaela shows up, the first thing he says to her is, "What are you doing here?" He hasn't seen this girl that he grew up with, the girl that he was, for all purposes, engaged to, going to marry, be the mother of his children. No tenderness whatsoever, just instead roughly addressing her, "What are you doing here?" And when he finally agrees to leave with Michaela to say goodbye to Mom, listen to the tender proclamation of love, being very sarcastic here, that comes out of his mouth as he tells Carmen in a snarling, threatening manner, "We will meet again."
Sois contente, je pars, mais nous revenons.
As the brass instruments play that particular motive that represents doom and fate. Dee-da-da-da-dum. Well, of course, we can all see where this is heading by this point. There will be a final confrontation. Carmen and Don José are really not like a couple in love. They're like two chemicals that should never be combined in the same test tube. The reason we keep hearing that motive of doom and fate throughout the opera is that from the time they spot each other, there is no escaping the disaster, the ruin that faces both of them. Sometimes when chemicals are combined, they combust. There is an explosion. And in the final confrontation, when José, who has been stalking Carmen now, not having seen her for months, discovers her outside the bull ring in Seville, while inside the crowd is cheering her new boyfriend, Escamillo. This final combustion is going to happen and result in her death and his arrest and execution. Now, ladies, listen carefully. I want all you ladies to listen to these traits of the misogynist carefully. How about your boyfriend? How about your husband? How about the men in your life? Could you be interacting with a misogynist? Here's another telltale red flag clue. The misogynist interacting with women often likes to play the role of the knight in shining armor. He will typically say that he wants to save the woman that he has chosen to possess. This is so interesting because when José first approaches Carmen in the final duet, before he pulls out the knife, this is what he says: "Carmen, I will save you." He says it twice. "I'll save you, and in saving you, I'll save myself." Just right out of the playbook for what 20th century psychologists learned was the approach of the misogynist, the knight in shining armor. And of course, in Carmen's defiant outburst in response to his offers to save her, saying, "No, I don't love you, I'll never be with you," again displaying that fearlessness, that defiance, which is the mark of the sociopath. A sociopath and a misogynist walk into a bar. We need to come up with a new joke, except this is no laughing matter because they are on a collision course with their respective attitudes and their respective pathologies. And he can't accept what he's hearing. And I'll just quote you another trait of the misogynist, another characteristic behavior: the inability to understand and accept reality, and the inability to be accountable for one's own actions. Everything is always someone else's fault. So even now, when Carmen is telling him to his face, "No, it's over. I moved on. I don't love you," he's saying, "We can forget. We have to forget what's come between us. You have to remember how you used to love me. It can be that way again." Again, a clinically accurate example of this pathology. And in terms of blaming others for his problems, how many times during this opera does he call her a demon, a she-devil? Everything is her fault. And yet, when Don José is sitting in prison awaiting execution, if he thinks about it objectively, everything that happened to him was a result of a poor decision that he made. The decision to pick up that flower, the decision to desert the army. Carmen didn't make him do these things. They were his decisions, his actions. You know, this is what is eternally fascinating to me about opera. Frankly, I can get tired of the tunes. Folks, I've been lecturing and teaching Carmen since December. I can go a long time before I hear the habanera again or the flower song. As beautiful as they are, enough of any. It's like eating too many pancakes, you know what I mean? After a while, you can go a long time before you want another pancake. What I don't get tired of is wondering how great artists can have such insight into human nature and human psychology. You know, these pathologies we've been discussing this morning, the sociopath was not really identified and codified and analyzed until the 1930s by an American psychologist. And here in 1875, Georges Bizet and his librettists create a clinically accurate portrait of a sociopath and a clinically accurate portrait of a misogynist. My mind boggles. I don't even know how to, I don't have the words to express this kind of brilliance. This is why we call these people geniuses, not because they think up clever tunes like Toreador, doot-de-doot-de-doo. That doesn't require genius. But this kind of dramatic truth, telling the truth about people, doing it through unforgettable music, that's what genius is. It's such a shame that first audience at the Opéra Comique in Paris in 1875 couldn't appreciate it. You probably know that this is one of those operas like The Barber of Seville and Madame Butterfly, which failed and was booed at the first performance. And when Georges Bizet tragically died at age 38 of a heart condition, he went to his grave thinking that he had never written a successful opera, a box office hit. And I've been thinking about that. Really, the opéra comique, you know, was a genre of opera aimed for middle-class audiences. This was not the grand opera at the Paris Opéra, where you would have epic sagas of biblical stories or Greek mythology, similar to the Ariadne that we just did a few weeks ago at Virginia Opera. The stories of the conflict between good and evil. You know, and it also was not the satire that you would get from Jacques Offenbach's theater. These were bourgeois shows for bourgeois audiences. They liked love stories. It might be a love story in which it ended happily, and the boy and the girl got together at the end, and you'd have that little lump in your throat. Or it might be a tragedy in which the soprano maybe passed away. She might die. But if she died, it would be a pretty death. She would swallow poison and just sort of gently go to sleep and not wake up, or maybe have a little touch of tuberculosis, do a little coughing, and gently expire That was okay. That would send the audience home happy, thinking they'd seen something poetic. They weren't expecting a slutty, sexually promiscuous gypsy to be butchered on stage by a deranged military deserter. This was, mon Dieu, disgusting, revolting. People went home traumatized by this violence. Now, if you're thinking that sounds unlikely, well, just remember, a lot of you who listen to WHRO public radio also watch Downton Abbey on PBS, and their season just ended. And a lot of you who enjoy Downton Abbey did not watch TV shows like Dexter or Breaking Bad. And why? Because the violence was so graphic. You know, the people in Downton Abbey are just as rotten as the people in Breaking Bad, but they live in a nice house, they wear nice clothes, and you don't have to see, hemorrhaging from the jugular vein after someone's throat is slit. If we feel that way sometimes in 2014, imagine a middle-class audience in 1875 seeing a woman stabbed to death right in front of them, not slipping into a coma or expiring of poison. Now, just a few years later, we had Pagliacci by Leoncavallo, in which the same thing happened. A man butchers his wife in the final scene for her unfaithfulness. Well, now it was cool. Now it was Verismo, the new school of Italian opera. The thing is, Bizet did it first. He really kind of drop-kicked opera and invented something new, something revolutionary that hadn't been seen before. Graphic violence in an opera comique. What would he have accomplished had he lived to be as old as Verdi? He died when he had just found his voice and just started creating masterpieces. It's the greatest loss that I know to music history. Well, I hope that I have managed to make you think in a new and kind of fresh manner about two standard opera characters that a lot of people think they know. Even if you don't agree with me, come to see Carmen and see if some of these ideas take root, if you can see the pathology being brought to life in purely musical terms. I think it's one of the great masterpieces that we have in all of opera. And I thank you for listening this afternoon. We'll see you at the Opera House.